Well, I want to welcome you to our message this week. Glad to have you joining us. Next Sunday, we're actually going to be worshiping in the park. Hope you can join us. July 4th, there's a special kids event that we're doing over there. We're hoping that there'll be many children that come to it. It's kind of an all-family event. And then on July 11th, the following Sunday, we'll have the Minnesota Teen and Adult and Teen Challenge Choir is going to be with us. Should be a special Sunday as well. Over the last couple of weeks, we have looked at how at the height of Jesus' popularity in the middle of his ministry years, he preached a message by the Sea of Galilee that intentionally separated the curious, casual believers from those that eventually ended up being all-in disciples. Today we're going to be bringing into hopefully greater focus what it would mean to be an all-in disciple. In fact, that's what we're going to be looking at throughout this summer. And there's perhaps no better place to continue than by considering the question that was asked of Jesus in Matthew chapter 22, verse 36, where a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." So, an all-in disciple means love God with all parts of your being. And then Jesus continues and he says, this is the first and greatest commandment, but the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Remember that command? You'll hear it again in a few minutes. All the law and the prophets, Jesus continues, hang on these two commandments. There are a lot of churches over the past 10, 20, maybe 30 years that have adopted kind of as their tagline, love God and love people. The two great things that the church ought to be involved with. If you could do these two things perfectly, you would be the model citizen. You would be the ideal parent. You would be the most amazing brother or sister. You would be everybody's favorite neighbor. You would be the perfect pastor. Okay, nobody has seen that happen yet. All-in disciples choose the love God, love people path. That's what we are called to. That's what Jesus is saying here. This is of utmost priority. Love God well, love people well. And probably every one of us does this, unfortunately, imperfectly. Probably every one of us needs reminders from time to time, needs periodic tune-ups, needs refresher courses, or needs course corrections. And so today we're going to be looking at the love people part of this. And I hope to give you some reasons to maybe back up just a little bit and think twice about how you could do this more fully, how to do it differently. So let's look. For decades, I have gravitated around a definition of love that I really have liked for a long time, that essentially is this: love is wanting God's best for another person. But in recent years, I've migrated maybe a little bit further beyond that, and I think where I would land right now is love is promoting God's best for the other person, because just wanting God's best for the other person can leave me in a situation where I can claim that I love without actually acting on that love. Promoting God's best communicates active involvement, not just feelings, but feelings that end up flowing out of our hearts and end up showing themselves in actions as we interact with other people around us. Promoting God's best requires more than just, I wish you well. It requires a response where a response is possible. So James wrote in James chapter 2, verse 15, he wrote, "Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is that?" If our love looks like that, it is not good. And it's really not consistent with genuine love. So I want to share 3 areas that can clarify if we have the fake love of a casual believer who doesn't show it in a whole lot of actions, or if we have the genuine love of an all-in disciple. And my challenge to you is to be thinking about these three areas and really evaluate and say, which of these should I be doing better in? I think we all have room for improvement today, okay? So first, genuine love loves the least, as in the people who are valued the lowest in society. I think of all the teachings that Jesus shared, the one that can still put the most ill at ease in my heart is the story of the sheep and the goats in Matthew chapter 25. Part of it reads this way, near the end of it. Then the Son of Man will say, so Jesus is speaking here, he says, then the Son of Man will say to those on his left, that's the goats, okay, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to drink, nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. And they also will answer, Lord, when? When did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you? And he will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did not do, whatever you have left undone, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, people hungry, people sick, people in prison, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. In verse 46, then they will go away to eternal punishment. Listen, Jesus is defining and describing unrighteous people. And he isn't saying that unrighteous people are transgender people, or are drunken spring break students, or are porn addicts, or are tax cheats. Certainly those individuals aren't, I don't believe, following God's best plan for their lives. But he's talking in these verses to his 12 disciples. In fact, this is the last major teaching that Jesus has with his disciples before his arrest. And he says, don't ignore poor people's needs. Don't help just out of your surplus. That risks facing a potentially horrifying judgment. And helping the least doesn't let us apply like a litmus test whereby we determine whether our help is going to succeed in changing their lives forever. And if it doesn't work, or if we deem that it's not going to work, then we're exempt from helping them out. Remember, in the parable of the sower, when the farmer goes out to sow seed, he sows it somewhat indiscriminately. Part of it falls on soil that's never going to produce a crop. Part of it ends up getting wasted, eaten by the birds, dried up and shriveled up. Part of it produces a good crop. But the sower sows in many places where the best long-term consequences don't end up coming about. It falls on ground, the seed falls on ground where it will never flourish. The farmer sows the seed anyway. So loving the least means that as we get involved in giving of our surplus, giving of our means to other people, sometimes it's going to get messy. Sometimes it's going to get frustrating. And we will understandably be tempted to think that it's a waste of our time and our effort, so we shouldn't help. In 2 weeks, as I said already, we're going to be having the Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge choir here. We'll hear their stories again, and if you're like me, I'll be reaching for my handkerchief. And if we had a question and answer with the leaders of that ministry, and we asked them, how many of your guys that are in the program right now will stay sober for good? The answer will never be 100%. But those guys who are going to be coming, some of whom have done jail time and could certainly be included in the groups of people that Jesus teaches about when he speaks about helping the least, some of them will find Jesus and they will have their lives transformed. So maybe a step of faith for you might be that we love them with like a way more generous offering for that ministry than we've ever done before, even while we're in the midst of a capital campaign for a future permanent home for New Life Church. Could that be an all-in disciple response? It might be. A casual believer response would be to open our wallets without thinking up until the moment that we take the offering in a couple of weeks and looking inside and finding $3 and throwing it in a plate, knowing it will never change anything about how we have to live our lives, not even in that coming week. A further step of loving the least means that we make extra effort to stay connected to people in need, people who have made terrible choices or paid the price for others' terrible choices, or perhaps both. There are some people that I have chosen to invest in their lives on a regular basis, even when they have failed, even when they have kept me at arm's distance. And I keep investing in their lives because I want to believe that day could come where my love for them gets them to, or helps get them to the point of finding Jesus, and they say to me, "Thanks, you never gave up on me." So all in disciples, we love the least. And all in disciples love the lost. One of the Christian Missionary Alliance's core values, that's our denomination, is this: lost people matter to God. Do they matter to you? How do we know that lost people matter to God? All we have to do is to look at the cross, okay? Jesus paid an excruciating price for lost people to be forgiven. But if we aren't willing to pay any cost or any significant cost to see other people finding Jesus, then it reveals that what matters to God doesn't matter to us. In Luke 15, Jesus tells 3 stories of lost things. And the search for and recovery of those things always involves a cost. The first story is that of a shepherd who has 100 sheep and one of them strays away. And so the shepherd takes the risk of leaving 99 of the sheep on their own to go out and to search for the precious sheep that has wandered away. What does it cost the shepherd? Well, it costs him convenience. It perhaps costs him a sleepless night. He risks further losses by leaving the sheep unprotected. And of course, he loses time that he could be spending playing video games. Story number 2 is a lady loses one of 10 precious silver coins. Now, when we think of coins, we usually don't think of a significant amount of money, all right? But for them to have a silver coin, to lose a silver coin, represented a fair amount of their value, of their worth. The value would have been significant, which is maybe hard for us to understand or to grasp, because in our culture, we have built in so many safety nets for if something goes bad with something that is of value to us. If you lose your house to a tornado, you don't have to restart from zero because you have insurance. If your bank goes insolvent, the FDIC is going to secure your money up to a certain dollar amount, $250,000 or something like that, if we happen to have that much money in a bank, okay? But back then, there were no safety nets, okay? So when she finds out she had 10 coins and she's back down to 9, she goes all in to find the coin. It says that she sweeps every inch of her house, probably a dirt floor. Most likely the coin had gotten covered up with some dust or with some dirt or sand in a corner or something like that. The price that she pays, it's not a huge price, but she pays the price in extra work, perhaps a backache from having to go around with a short-handled broom and sweeping. She loses time that she could have been spending doing the laundry or scrolling through her Facebook account. And quite possibly she loses a measure of peace with her husband, because so many of us men are horrible when our wives make a mistake, even though I think the men make way, way more mistakes in our relationships with our wives. That is story number 2. She eventually finds the coin and celebrates. And then story number 3 is the story that we're all most familiar with, the story of the lost son, the prodigal son. The word prodigal doesn't mean rebellious. It doesn't mean wayward. It means extravagant. Okay, he goes out and lives extravagantly. Think of what that lost son costs his father. That father gives away his household wealth before he dies, perhaps even several years before he would end up dying. He loses his reputation in the community. He loses total control over his affairs. His decades of hard work get squandered by the son in a relatively short period of time. And then even when the son returns repentant, it costs the father more because he kills the choice steer, cow, and he has the expenses that go along with this party to celebrate the son who has come back to him. Lost valuables generally don't get required without an effort or a cost. Someone pays a price. And the same is true for lost people. Identifying with Jesus means that we must be willing to help pay the cost for loving lost people to Jesus. He did the hardest work, the most painful work. But he wants us to be involved in that process as well. And we can't do it without some effort, some loss on our part to help those people reconnect with their Creator God. If we love like Jesus, it will show in our willingness to pay a significant price for lost people to be found. So, all in disciples, they love the least. All in disciples love the lost. And for alliteration's sake today, I will say this. All in disciples love the last. And so I need to explain that, okay? So the big story throughout much of the Old Testament is how God is a covenant God and fulfills his covenant to his people. And the primary covenant that rises to the top in all of this was God's promise to Abraham, that he would give Abraham the promised land and that he would make Abraham's descendants into a great nation, all right? But after centuries of slavery in Egypt, God fulfills that promise to Abraham's descendants finally when Israel enters into the promised land. They receive the inheritance that had been promised to their ancestor Abraham. But largely because sin has caused men to be envious and to fight and to go to war in virtually every culture to try to take what belongs to someone else, history has always included people being displaced from their homeland and ending up in a different land. And eventually Israel finds themselves with immigrants wanting to enter their country because they have had to flee from tough conditions back home. Israel gets to the promised land. Immigrants arrive later. Immigrants arrive last. Listen to God's idea for those who come last or those who come later. And part of the reason I'm addressing this is because I think this is one of the major issues that Americans, Christians, are dealing with these days. How do we respond to the immigrant situation in our country? And does God need to do a little bit of surgery in our hearts regarding our responses? So in Exodus chapter 23, verse 9, as God is laying out the law to the Israelites, he says this, "Also you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Simply put, God is saying here, don't treat immigrants harshly or with contempt. Why? Because Israel knew the heart of a stranger. I'd never paid attention to that phrase until I was studying it this week. What does the heart of a stranger feel? The heart of a stranger feels like they don't belong. They feel unwelcome. They feel powerless. They feel insecure. They feel that if something goes wrong, they will be blamed for what goes wrong in the culture and the community that they find themselves in. They feel disadvantaged. They feel like the laws protect only citizens instead of protecting all human beings. And that raises a question that you can discuss sometime. Should laws benefit human beings or should laws benefit citizens? Or should laws benefit human beings primarily or benefit citizens primarily? So that was one of God's ideas related to the last. Here's another one of God's ideas. Leviticus 19, verse 34, more from the Old Testament law, where God says this, "The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you. And then listen to this line, and you shall love him as yourself. Does that sound familiar? Didn't we hear that a little bit earlier in the message? Okay, second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. That's what God is saying about your neighbors with different skin color. I'd never noticed that before in these verses about how to treat immigrants, how to treat the last ones to arrive. He says, treat them as though they were born here just like you were born here. And love them as much as you love yourself. Or maybe it would hit home more for us if we understood it to mean love the immigrant as much as you love your own child. That statement is perfectly consistent with this verse, Leviticus 19, verse 34. Family records that we have indicates that the earliest of my ancestors on the Burg side of the family seem to have come to America in the 1600s into one of the colonies, Connecticut. All right, they eventually wandered through Pennsylvania and landed in Wisconsin, where my dad was born in the early 1930s. But on my mom's side, my grandpa Meisner came to Minnesota as a toddler in 1894. His parents found no affordable farmland around the area near Fairmont, Minnesota, where they emigrated. So they left southern Minnesota and they went to the north woods of northwest Wisconsin, the forests up there. And that's where they settled in, carving out farmland from forest land. It must have been brutally difficult work. My understanding is, based on what Mom told me over the years, is that they didn't always feel real welcome as German immigrants during World War I and then eventually during World War II in the 1940s. But overall, the longer-term residents of the area at least didn't chase the Meissner family away. They weren't the last immigrants to arrive, but they were nowhere near the first ones, like some of those on my Burg side of the family seem to have been. But I'm so grateful they were never deported. And yes, they did come here legally. So there are extenuating factors to consider in some of these issues. Here's what I thought of this week. Most of your stories, or the stories of most of your ancestors, will be parallel to either ancestors coming early in America's history, like my dad's side of the family, or much later, like on my mom's side of the family. And think about this. Within a year of whenever your ancestors got here, they would have been considered to have been among the last to have arrived. And if your ancestors had gotten sent back, well, my life would be lessened by that because I wouldn't have gotten to know you. Yes, loving the last is sometimes challenging for me. I read the newspaper, I read the online articles, I listen to the television programs, I hear the carefully crafted arguments of those who have concerns about how many foreigners America should welcome. All in discipleship was never going to be easy. I don't think there's a simplistic answer to our immigration situation in America, but I do know this. I want to err on the side of my heart being soft toward people who are coming here with significant needs or coming here from troubling circumstances. I think we're better off having soft hearts rather than hard hearts. Some summary statements to help bring things into focus of how a casual believer will love compared to how an all-in disciple will love. Casual believers feel that it is enough to simply share their leftovers or share their surplus with people in need, and it never changes how they have to live. All-in disciples regularly find themselves compelled by inner love to give up a significant desire in order to respond to people who are less fortunate than they are. Casual believers are grateful for God's grace. They certainly are, but not enough to sacrifice so others can also receive grace. Being a significant part of helping salvation come to lost people isn't a priority for them. All-in disciples are overwhelmed by God's love to the point where they are willing to make significant efforts so others find Jesus too. And finally, Casual believers are more likely to listen to the voices that say that immigrants are a cause of much of what is wrong in our country. But all-in disciples remember that our ancestors benefited from America's welcome mat, and that a reasonable balance is consistent with Bible principles that go back thousands of years. I don't think I can fully unravel how that love looks like or explain what genuine love looks like in each individual circumstance. I do know this. I want to find out better how to make it work well for me and for our church, in our community, by loving the least and loving the lost and loving the last ones who have gotten to our shores. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Dear God, here's what I know. Very simply, I have been a recipient of just an amazing amount of love that has come to me from you, come to me through my family, come to me through my friends, others around me as well. And if I have been a recipient of so much love in that way, well then I just want to be a free-flowing channel, God, to be able to communicate that love to others around me. And it is going to cost me. If it doesn't cost me, then I think I would be in that category of being a casual believer rather than the category of an all-in disciple who says, this has transformed my life, being loved by my Creator God and by others around me, and it is going to change how I love others to the point of it actually hurting. So let that be true for me. Let that be true for those who are watching. Let that be true for New Life Church. That's my heart's desire. I believe it's also your desire for us as well. And I pray this in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. We'll have a video next week again, but if you can join us at the park, July 4th, 10:15, we'd love to have you come. Have a great week.